Shannon Baptist Church exists to make, mature, and multiply disciples of Jesus Christ one life at a time in the Midlands and beyond.
Who is your BFF, your best friend forever? This is a person whom you trust with your life, someone who has your best interests at heart, that person you laugh with, cry with, and share inside jokes. What a blessing God gave us when He created friendship. I'm Dawn D. Mercer Plank. Senior Pastor Dr. Daniel Dickert and I are taking this podcast in the Great Questions series to encourage you to have and to build solid friendships. Daniel, the Bible definitely has a lot to say about friends. What stands out the most to you when it comes to God's design for friendships?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Dawn D. What stands out most about God's design for friendship is that it's not optional, it's essential. From the very beginning, God declared there in Genesis chapter 2, it's not good for man to be alone. And while that verse is often used in the context of marriage, I think it also can reveal a deeper truth. We were created for connection. So friendship is a reflection of the relational nature of God Himself. And God's design for friendship, I believe, is rooted in loyalty, in honesty, in encouragement, and selfishness. You know, a verse that comes to mind when we think about friendship, Dondi, is Proverbs 17:17, which says, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born in the days of adversity," or a difficult time. So true friendship isn't based on convenience or comfort. It's not seasonal or shallow. I think that it seeks the best for others always. In fact, that's one of the things that I tell my kids often, even on the way to school this morning. Hey, be a good friend, not for what you can get out of it, but for what you can give to that person, how you can enhance that person. So I think another standout is that real friends speak truth even when it's hard. In a world where flattery is common and honesty is rare, I think godly friends love you enough to confront you even when you're drifting, to call you out in love, and then to call you back to truth. And lastly, I would say this, what stands out is that Jesus Himself modeled divine friendship. He called His disciples friends. I'm thinking right now of John 1:12, which says, "And as many as received them, He gave them the right to be called children of God." So this relational nature of God Himself, God's design is for friendship and for friendship.
You're giving some verses there. Also, I'd point out Proverbs 18:24, which says, "A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Why can it be argued, Daniel, that we should not try to make everyone our best friend and closest confidant?
Yeah, this verse draws a clear distinction between what I would call companions and true friends. So companions may be many, but that doesn't mean they're reliable. In fact, Proverbs warns that surrounding yourself with crowds doesn't guarantee support. In some cases, it can lead to ruins. I think that's why it's unwise to try to make everyone your closest friend or confidant. At first, not every relationship is meant to be deep. Jesus had layers of friendships and even relationships. When Jesus talked about the sending out of the 70, He had the 12, even the three, the inner three, Peter, James, and John. So even among the 12, John was referred to as the disciple whom Jesus loved the most. And this wasn't favoritism, it was wisdom. After all, John was the one who would write the Gospel of John, 1 John, and even the book of Revelation. So I think it's saying that when we try to make everyone our best friend, we stretch ourselves thin and risk confusion. Deep friendship requires time and trust and intentionality, and simply we don't have time for everyone. So we have to use wisdom there. And I also would say this, also trying to make everyone our confidant may reflect a misunderstanding of biblical boundaries. I mean, Proverbs 4:23, which says, "Guard your heart, for it's the source of life or the wellspring of life." That doesn't mean we isolate ourselves. It means we practice discernment. There's a great quote, I've shared it on Sunday mornings, but the more isolated a person is, the more prone they are to sin's desires. But some people are meant to be friends for a season, others for a reason, and I think only a few for a lifetime. I was a young boy, and my dad used to tell me, I'm sure you've heard this, many have heard this, that if you have 5 friends, true friends at the end of your life, then you consider yourself as a blessed person. And I think additionally, we confuse companionship with covenant level friendship, and we often expect more from others than they're able or sometimes even willing to give. So there is a distinction between being a best friend and a close confidant. And I would say this in short, we shouldn't try to make everyone our best friend, because true friendship is rare. It's costly, but it is deeply valuable.
Awesome. Yeah, there's only so much of you to go around.
That's right.
When you were saying that. And if you really want to be that really solid, good friend, you can have lots of friendships.
Yep.
But to really be that close in friendship really requires you to narrow the field out there so you can pour more into that person. There's another verse, Proverbs 27:17 says, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." What are some ways friends can sharpen one another without coming across as a know-it-all? Because reality is, it's kind of easy to point out someone else's problems, and sometimes it is an area. How do you ride that line there between being that know-it-all and truly being a friend?
Yeah, when I thought about this question, Dondi, immediately my mind went to my experiences and what were the qualities or characteristics of some of my best friends, closest friends, and those who had added value to my life. And as I said before, I think that a friendship, it's not just what can someone add to you, how can you add to some value to someone's life, but a few things that I thought about. Number one, those who ask questions before offering correction. In the book of Job, you had so-called friends,
right. Yes.
but they were quick to offer their opinions before asking the right questions. And I found that some of the friendships that offer the best value to me, they'll offer really good questions and make me think introspectively. And a lot of times their questions are not just for introspection, they're for my betterment. So I think one of the ways that you can sharpen one another as a friend is ask questions before offering correction. Another is speak from shared struggle rather than criticism. And I love hearing the struggles that some of my friends may be going through. And even though some of my friends, not all of my friends and many of my friends are not in ministry, they're outside of ministry, but hearing about their struggles. And when friends share their own weaknesses and point to God's strength, I think it sharpens without shaming. And then also I would say pray with and for your friends. I think that's the greatest way that you can sharpen someone. It's one of the most powerful tools. It isn't correction, it's intercession. And I think prayer reminds us that it's not our wisdom that changes people, but God's grace. And one of the things that I try to do, not only for my family and for my children, but also for my friends. I'm in a grow group. We meet every Monday morning at 6:30 a.m. And I tell folks all the time, it's one of the most life-giving hours of the week. We meet downtown Columbia. A lot of times we're supposed to only give 5 or 10 minutes or so for what we call our highs and lows. Sometimes we're 20, 25 minutes in and we're still just talking about, one another's week. All right, guys, we got to get focused on the scriptures.
Right.
But, having that time together each week, these are guys from within our church that have become like brothers. And, I tell them in that setting, I'm not pastor, I'm just Daniel. And for other guys to challenge me, to sharpen me, to hold me accountable, they'll ask me questions. Hey, Daniel, have you been the father that you're supposed to be this week? The friend, have you been the husband? Have you looked at anything or watched anything that would be displeasing to the Lord? And then they'll ask the question sometimes. They'll say, well, have you lied about anything that you just said? And I think that's just great to have that form of accountability in friends that that have your best interest in mind. So I would say all of those things, whether it be asking questions before offering correction, whether that be speaking from a shared struggle, praying for one another, all of those things can be deeply beneficial. And in our Grow group, we stop each week by praying for one another. And all throughout the week, I want to continue to pray for those friends because I think that's the best thing that you can give in sharpening one another in a friendship.
It's a best gift to give a friend. That's true friendship. You know, I love that you have that group of guys, but Daniel, the reality is most men I have seen over numerous decades of my life don't have those intimate relationships with other men that women have with women. It's just easier for women, I think, to have those strong friendships. Why is it men struggle in that area?
Yeah, I think some of this, Donnie, is culturally. Men are often raised to value strength and independence, self-reliance, and bravado. So even from a young age,
To not show that vulnerability.
to not show vulnerability. And I think boys are told to man up, don't cry, handle it yourself. And over time, I think that conditioning creates a belief that vulnerability is weakness. And I think real friendship requires an openness to the vulnerabilities. Otherwise, it just stays surface level. And I think another reason is competition. I think that among both guys and girls, I'm going to overgeneralize here, but specifically among men, there's a competition factor. And relationships often revolve around shared activity, whether that be sports, work, or projects. Somebody told me not long ago, one of my ministry mentors, they said, the way that women grow is by talking together. The way that men grow is by working together. And I think there's some truth in that, but these shared activities, a lot of times it can be around competition. And men might spend hours together without ever talking about what's really going on in their heart if it's related to competition. And I think fear of rejection also plays a role. I think many men don't want to risk being misunderstood or judged or appearing too needy, and so they keep things light and at a distance. And add to that the busyness of careers and family and responsibilities. Friendship often gets pushed to the margins. But we've got to go back to the scriptures because of what Proverbs 17:17 says, iron sharpens iron. We need friends who will challenge and encourage and walk with us. And I've just seen in so many times, just recently thinking about those days when I was in seminary, and some of my closest friends that I still talk to on a regular basis, we go back to those times when we were in the fires, so-called, together of a learning environment, and how we grew. I think it's indispensable when we can give time to a relationship. The ROI long-term is valuable as opposed to so-called the challenges of giving that time on the front end.
So how would you advise men if they're listening right now and they think, I just don't have friendships with other guys? You know, they might be best friends with their wife, but they need some guy time. How would you encourage them in trying to develop that?
I think you have to be intentional. And the reason why I say that is there are so many things that are vying for our calendar. And if you're in a stage of life where you have a career or with a family and, so-called trying to climb corporate ladders and all that goes into just life, I think you have to put it on your calendar and make time. And so, we make time for a lot of other things. Why not do that for a friendship or a relationship? I would also say this, be consistent. Strong friendships aren't built overnight. They're forged over time. And sometimes this sharpening can take time and friction and even commitment. So just know that in any friendship, it's going to take time. And then I would say walk in humility and grace. You don't have to need one another at all times, but in fact, I think that friendships deepen when we admit that we don't have it all together. Vulnerability invites connection. And one more thing that I would say is godly friendship is a gift, but it's also a real responsibility. So start small, be real, show up, and watch how God grows something strong.
That's awesome. You mentioned how God has already, blessed you personally with friends throughout your life. That it's neat to hear that because it sounds like in every stage of your life, you've been able to have those friendships with other guys. Part of it that I hear you saying that made it work was just spending that time together, doing something together.
Yeah, I would go through each season, the formative years of being in my parents' household and then the college years. even the just married years, and even now the multiple kids and the busyness of life years. And I think that friendships will look different in each of those seasons, but I've seen the value of friendships. And a couple things I would say is God has given those friendships, I think, at just the right time. They've looked different in every season, but I've been blessed to be around godly friends. You know, as Romans will talk about, bad company corrupts good character. And I do think that pursuing so-called relationships and friendships for the sake of the mission of God, you know, where believers will try to get to know unbelievers for the sake of being able to share the gospel and to care for, like, that's valuable. But your closest friends should be those who hold the same values that you have, and those who, from a Christian standpoint, would point you towards God and towards godliness. And I think about the men in my life that there aren't many people who have what I would call a midnight friend. That if something happened to you at midnight, they would drop everything and they would help. And you know, if you have a few midnight friends, consider yourself blessed.
Isn't that great to have that? Proverbs 27:6 says, "Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy." I'm reminded that hurtful honesty from a true friend is more beneficial than the admiration and accolades of those who really are not true to us. I often have told our kids that when they were growing up, I would say to them that in order to have a friend, they first had to be a friend. Your children are still so young. What lessons are you teaching them about friendship?
Yeah, you know, whenever we drop the kids off in the morning, I'm normally the one that has car duty with our kids, and we try to tell them, and I try to tell them, be a good friend. You know, we have what we call the car line exhortation in our you know, the things that we tell our kids, and we all, hey, be a good friend. And one of the core lessons that we still try to instill is that friendship isn't about popularity or what you can get. It's about love and service and integrity. And we also talk to our kids about choosing friends wisely. And, you know, they're at a younger age right now. I think that we'll get into that the more that they get older. But I was recently reading in Proverbs 13 where it says, "The one who walks with the wise will become wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm." And kids who encourage what's right, they don't pressure what's wrong. And so we try to tell our kids that. And also we teach them that friendship is a two-way street. That yes, that you're to be a good friend, but also that you're to look for a good friend. So be a blessing, not a burden, and to be a giver, not a taker.
When is it best to not be a friend to someone? For example, is it really possible for an employer to be friends with his or her employees, or for a professor to be friends with his or her students? Does being in a position of authority alter the ability to be BFFs?
Yeah, so there are situations where friendship must be filtered through wisdom and responsibility, especially in positions of authority. So as you just mentioned, Dondi, as an employer or professor, is first called to steward that role faithfully. I'm called as a pastor to steward that role faithfully. And that means making decisions that are fair, unbiased, and in the best interest of the whole. And sometimes forming those close friendships with employees or students can blur those lines. That being said, I think that godly friendship can exist within authority structures as long as boundaries are clearly understood and maintained. And I think the key is maturity, mutual respect, and clarity of roles. Paul in the Bible had close relationships with Timothy and others that he mentored, but there was always an understanding of authority and accountability. And I think that in other situations, like the toxic or manipulative individual, it may be wise to withhold friendship while still demonstrating Christ-like love. And so I think that wisdom is needed here. You can be friendly without being a deep friend. That being said, as long as that boundaries are understood and there's no breaking of boundaries, and I think in each situation that is going to look different. In the relationship that you mentioned, the employee to employer, I think that's a two-way street too when it comes to the boundary. I think both the employer and the employee has to understand what are the boundaries that are set up within an organization that will allow for friendship. And if those boundaries are affirmed, then there can be a close friendship. But in some cases, you may have one person that will honor the boundary and the other that will not. So yes, being friendly at all times. I think the depth of the friendship will depend on, one, the responsibility and the growth of both individuals, but then also what is acceptable within particular relational structures.
And when it comes to God, He's the authority figure in our lives. But comment on how amazing it is that He also desires to have a friendship with us. And right now I'm thinking of that song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it says about Jesus that He was a friend of sinners. It says that the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. Even Romans 5:8, but God demonstrated His own love for us, and that while we were still sinners, that Christ died for us. Or, in every New Testament book, you will see Paul, he'll often begin by saying brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. There was these phrases of affection that showed the relational connectivity between those in Scripture. And so I do think that it's something that God wants. He desires us to have friendship, that we are better together when we are in relationship, in community, and in friendship.
Awesome. Well, my prayer for all of you listening right now is that if you do not have a close friend, that the Lord will bless you with that special gift. I'll give a shout out right now to my BFF, Gina, because I know she listens to this podcast. And for those of you who do have that exceptional person in your life, go ahead and take 2 minutes right now to send him or her a text or to make a phone call just to say how much you love having that person for your friend. Coming up next week on our podcast, join us as we welcome Jesus, jelly beans, Easter, and eggs to the studio. For Shannon Plus Podcast, I'm Dawn D. Mercer Plank.
And I'm Daniel Dickard, Senior Pastor of Shannon Baptist Church. Signing off. We'll see you next week.